My name is Scarlett. If you had asked me a decade ago what 65 would look like, I would have painted you a picture of Sunday dinners, a house filled with the loud, chaotic laughter of grandchildren, and the quiet comfort of a life well earned. I certainly wouldn't have pictured myself sitting alone at a mahogany dining table set for two, staring at a cooling peach cobbler, while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the remaining hours of my birthday. I spent 35 years of my life as a charge nurse in the emergency room at Grady Memorial Hospital here in Atlanta. If you know anything about Grady, you know it's the heartbeat of the city. I've seen gunshot wounds, multi-car pileups, and the frantic, tear-stained faces of mothers praying for miracles. I built a career on staying calm when the world was falling apart. I was trained to triage, to assess the damage, and to stop the bleeding. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the quiet, invisible hemorrhage of losing my own son to his own vanity. Today was my 65th birthday. A milestone. My husband, Marcus, passed away 7 years ago from a sudden stroke. Since then, the big days, holidays, anniversaries, birthdays, have carried a certain heaviness, a quiet echo of the man who used to fill this house with his booming baritone voice and his gentle, steady love. But I am not a woman who wallows. I woke up early, pulled back the heavy curtains to let the Georgia sun spill into the living room, and decided today was going to be a good day. My only son, Julian, was supposed to come over for dinner. He is a vice president at a major wealth management firm downtown. Marcus and I worked our fingers to the bone to put him through Morehouse, and then an MBA program. We gave him the world so he could conquer it, and he did. But somewhere along his climb up the corporate ladder, the boy who used to help me weed the garden turned into a man who checked his Rolex when I spoke too slowly. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking. Not the fancy, flavorless food they serve at those downtown galas he attends, but real food. The food that built him. Smothered chicken, collard greens with smoked turkey, macaroni and cheese baked until the edges were perfectly crisp, and a peach cobbler from Marcus's mother's recipe. The house smelled like home. It smelled like love. At 4:30 p.m., the phone rang. I smiled, wiping flour from my hands onto my apron, expecting him to ask if he should pick up some wine on the way. "Hey, Mama," Julian's voice came through the speaker. It was rushed. He had that tight, clipped tone he used when he was trying to manage a situation rather than have a conversation. "Julian, baby," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Dinner is just about ready. The cobbler is in the oven." A heavy sigh on the other end. "Mama, look, I am so sorry. I can't make it tonight." I froze. "Can't make it? Are you okay? Is Amanda all right?" "Everyone's fine," he said quickly, the faint sound of traffic in the background. "It's work. We've got a massive compliance crisis with one of our biggest accounts. I'm actually grabbing a cab to Hartsfield-Jackson right now. They're putting me on a red-eye to New York to put out the fire. It's a total disaster, Mama." Disappointment settled in my chest, heavy and cold, but the nurse in me, the mother in me, immediately offered grace. "Oh, sweetheart, on a Friday night? That's terrible. You make sure you get something to eat at the airport, you hear me?" I will. I promise I'll make it up to you, Mama. We'll do a proper birthday dinner next weekend, okay? Just you and me. Love you. Got to go." The line went dead before I could even say I loved him back. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The house, which just moments before had felt warm and expectant, suddenly felt cavernous. I walked over to the stove and turned off the burners. I covered the food with foil. I didn't cry. Black women of my generation, we don't cry over canceled dinners. We swallow it, we adjust, and we keep moving. I told myself he was providing for his family. I told myself I should be proud of his success. I set a single place at the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of red wine, and ate my birthday dinner in silence. By 8 p.m., the house was completely dark except for the warm amber glow of the reading lamp in the living room. I was wrapped in my favorite cashmere cardigan, a gift Marcus had given me for our 30th anniversary. I sat in my armchair, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, and reached for my iPad. My 17-year-old granddaughter, Amanda, had bought it for me last Christmas. She's the light of my life. Amanda is smart, perceptive, and has this fierce independence that reminds me so much of myself at her age. She was the one who taught me how to navigate social media, patiently showing me how to double-tap photos and watch stories on Instagram. "You have to keep up, Nana," she'd tease me. "I need you to spy on my dad for me. I smiled at the thought of her and tapped the little colorful Instagram icon, hoping to see a picture of her cheerleading practice or her debate team. At the top of the screen, her profile picture had a glowing purple ring around it. A new story. I tapped it. The screen illuminated my face. Music blared from the iPad speakers, a trendy, upbeat R&B song. The video was sweeping across a dimly lit, incredibly opulent dining room. Crystal chandeliers, dark mahogany paneling, white linen tablecloths. I recognized the place immediately. It was a prime steakhouse in Buckhead, T.E. the kind of establishment where a steak costs more than my first car payment. The camera panned, and there was Amanda, looking gorgeous in a silk dress, laughing and holding up her phone. Text splashed across the video in sparkling letters. "Happy 45th birthday to my mom." My breath hitched. The camera kept moving. It landed on Patricia, my daughter-in-law. Patricia, with her perfectly highlighted hair, her Botox smooth forehead, and that permanent look of mild disdain she carried whenever she entered my home. She was laughing, holding a glass of champagne. Sitting next to her, beaming with pride, was Edith, Patricia's mother. Edith was a woman who made sure everyone knew she owned a string of medical spas in the suburbs. She was the kind of woman who wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors and spoke to waiters like they were stray dogs. She was clapping her hands in delight. And then, the camera shifted one last time. Standing behind Patricia, leaning down to kiss her cheek, was my son, Julian. The same Julian who 3 hours ago claimed he was rushing to the airport for a red-eye flight to New York. He wasn't in a taxi. He wasn't dealing with a corporate crisis. He was wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, holding a velvet jewelry box, looking happier than I had seen him in years. I stared at the screen as the 15-second clip looped, over and over. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses. It felt like a physical blow, a sharp, twisting pain right beneath my ribs. He didn't just forget my birthday. He didn't just double book. He looked his mother in the eye, or rather, through the phone, and fabricated an elaborate, detailed lie so he could take his wife and his mother-in-law to a 5-star restaurant in Buckhead. My birthday and Patricia's birthday often fell in the same week. Usually we managed it. But this year, Julian had made a choice. He chose the glitz, the glamour, the approval of a mother-in-law who despised him for not coming from generational wealth. He chose to throw me away like an old, expired ticket stub. My hands started to tremble, not from sadness, from the sheer, unadulterated disrespect of it all. I gave that boy my youth. I gave him the best years of my life, standing on my feet for 12-hour shifts in the ER so he wouldn't have to take out student loans. And this was the return on my investment? Being lied to on my 65th birthday so he could play the big shot provider for a family that viewed me as nothing more than a relic from his humble past? I paused the video by pressing my thumb to the screen. I needed to breathe. I needed to process the betrayal. But as my thumb held the image still, my eyes focused on something else. Something that made the blood in my veins run completely, terrifyingly cold. I pinched the screen to zoom in. The image blurred slightly, pixelating around the edges, but my vision was perfectly clear. I didn't need my reading glasses for this. Julian was holding open a velvet box, presenting a gift to Patricia, but she was already wearing a necklace. It caught the dim, romantic lighting of the steakhouse, gleaming with a soft, iridescent luster. A double strand of Akoya pearls, perfectly matched, held together by a vintage platinum and diamond clasp in the shape of a magnolia blossom. My stomach plummeted. The air in my living room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Those were Marcus's mother's pearls. Let me tell you about those pearls. They weren't just jewelry. They were history. Marcus's father, a Pullman porter who worked himself into an early grave, saved every extra dime he made for 15 years to buy those pearls for his wife on their 25th anniversary. They survived the Great Migration. They survived the Jim Crow South. They were passed down to me on my wedding day, placed around my neck by a woman whose hands were scarred from domestic labor, but whose dignity was unmatched. When Marcus died, I took those pearls off. They were too heavy with grief. I placed them in a velvet-lined box and took them to the safety deposit box at the downtown branch of Julian's bank. The agreement, the solemn vow Marcus and I had made, was that those pearls belonged to Amanda. They were to be given to our granddaughter on her wedding day, to remind her of the blood, sweat, and absolute resilience of the black women who came before her. Because Julian managed my finances, a setup we created when Marcus was sick to ensure bills were paid without me having to worry, his name was on the safe deposit box as a joint key holder. He had gone into the vault. He had taken his grandmother's legacy, and he had draped it around the neck of a woman who once complained that my macaroni and cheese was too heavy, a woman who didn't know a thing about struggle, sacrifice, or legacy. He had stolen from his own daughter's future to buy his wife's temporary affection. In that exact moment, something inside me shifted. The hurt, the profound sadness of a mother discarded by her child vanished. It simply evaporated. In its place rose something entirely different. It was the charge nurse taking over. In the ER, when a patient comes in with a severed artery, you don't cry over the blood on the floor. You don't ask why it happened. You grab the tourniquet, you pull it tight, and you systematically shut down the damage. My son had become a liability. He had crossed a line that could never, ever be uncrossed. I lowered the iPad. The silence in my house no longer felt lonely. It felt like a war room. I walked over to the antique desk in the corner of my living room and opened the bottom drawer. I pulled out a thick leather binder. Inside were the documents Marcus and I had drafted years ago. Life insurance policies, the deed to the house, and the master documents for the joint investment accounts and savings that Julian so proudly managed for me. Julian thought I was just a sweet, technologically illiterate widow who nodded along whenever he used Wall Street jargon. He thought I was blind to the world of finance. What he didn't know was that for the past 5 years, after noticing some administrative fees that didn't add up, I had been quietly educating myself. I had taken online courses in wealth management. I knew exactly where every single dime of Marcus's $1.8 million estate was located. I looked at the clock. It was 8:45 p.m. Julian was sitting in Buckhead, sipping a $300 bottle of wine, thinking he had successfully managed his nagging mother. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he held all the power. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He forgot whose blood ran in his veins. He forgot that before I was a sweet grandmother, I was Scarlett Miller, and I was about to teach him a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. I picked up my phone and dialed the 24-hour premium client hotline for the bank. It was time to stop the bleeding. It was time to take everything back. The silence in my living room was no longer a symbol of my loneliness. It was the quiet of an operating room before the first incision. I set my iPad face down on the antique side table and walked over to my desk. I opened my MacBook, the screen flaring to life and casting a pale bluish light over my face. For the past 5 years, I had let Julian believe he was the sole master of my financial universe. When Marcus died, Julian had stepped in, puffing out his chest, telling me, "Don't you worry your pretty head about the market, Mama. I've got you." I let him manage the day-to-day trading because, frankly, I was drowning in grief. But as the fog of mourning lifted, my natural inclination for order returned. I was a charge nurse. I managed inventory, controlled narcotics, and optimized emergency room budgets. I was not a woman who stayed in the dark for long. I navigated to the portal of his wealth management firm and typed in my master credentials. It was a primary access code Julian didn't even know I possessed. I had requested it in person at a branch across town 2 years ago, just to keep an eye on things. The dashboard loaded. There it was, the Miller family estate. Total assets, $1.84 million. It was the culmination of Marcus's 40 years of contracting work and my 35 years of double shifts at Grady Memorial. It was blood pressure medication we skipped to save money. It was vacations we never took. It was our sweat, digitized into green numbers on a screen. I clicked into the transaction history, my eyes scanning the ledger with clinical detachment. If Julian was bold enough to walk into a vault and steal his grandmother's pearls to appease his wife, what else was he bold enough to do? I started a fiscal autopsy. At first glance, everything looked normal. Mutual funds were performing steadily. The blue-chip stocks Marcus favored were untouched. But then I clicked on the tab labeled Pending Authorizations. A little red notification icon sat next to a line item that made my heart slam against my ribs. Wire transfer. Pending. $900,000. 00 destination. Peachtree Luxury Real Estate Escrow Services. $900,000. Half of everything Marcus and I had built, neatly packaged and waiting for the banking system to process it when the business day officially opened the next morning. I leaned closer to the screen, my reading glasses perched on the bridge of my nose. Peachtree Luxury Real Estate. I recognized the name. It was the premier brokerage for the most elite gated communities in Buckhead. Julian wasn't just buying Patricia a nice dinner. He was buying her a mansion. And he was doing it using my retirement fund, my safety net, as his personal piggy bank. My hands were shaking, but my mind was moving at a terrifying speed. How could he authorize a wire transfer of that magnitude? The joint account required dual authorization for any withdrawal over $50,000. Julian knew this. The bank's algorithm would automatically flag it unless the proper legal exemptions were uploaded. I clicked on the paperclip icon next to the pending transfer, labeled Supporting Documentation. A PDF loaded onto my screen. The header read, Durable Power of Attorney, Financial Matters. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read through the legal jargon. The document claimed that I, Scarlett Miller, being of declining physical and mental fortitude, was voluntarily surrendering total unilateral control of my assets to my son, Julian Marcus Miller. It gave him the power to buy, sell, liquidate, and transfer without my consent. I scrolled to the bottom of the second page. There was my signature, Scarlett A. Miller. It was notarized. I stared at the ink on the screen. The loop of the S was a little too shaky. The cross of the T was slanted at the wrong angle. It was a good forgery, but it was a forgery. Someone had traced my signature from an old Christmas card or a medical form, and then I looked at the name of the notary public stamped next to the fake signature. Eleanor Vance. The name clicked instantly. Eleanor Vance was the manager of one of Edith's suburban medical spas. The audacity of it took my breath away. This wasn't just Julian being weak. This was a coordinated, premeditated robbery. Edith and Patricia had orchestrated this. They had fed my son's ego, preyed on his insecurities, and convinced him that taking my money wasn't stealing. It was his inheritance in advance. They had sat around a table, perhaps sipping the very same champagne I watched them drink on Instagram tonight, and plotted to strip me of my agency, my security, and my dignity. They looked at a 65-year-old black widow and saw an easy mark. They thought I was a relic. They thought I would quietly fade into the background, eating my peach cobbler alone, while they lived in a multi-million-dollar estate financed by my dead husband's sweat. I closed the PDF. I didn't cry. The time for being a hurt mother was over. It was time to be the master of my own house. I picked up my cell phone. It was 9:15 p.m. I dialed the 1-800 number listed on the back of my Platinum Bank card, the premium client line that operated 24 hours a day. Welcome to Apex Wealth Management Premium Services. My name is David. With whom do I have the pleasure of speaking? My name is Scarlett Miller, I said. My voice was low, steady, and sharp as a scalpel. I am the primary account holder for the Miller family estate, account number ending in 4409. Good evening, Mrs. Miller. How can I assist you tonight? First, David, I need to verify my identity using my voice biometrics and my master PIN, because what we are about to do requires absolute clearance. I went through the security protocols. David's tone shifted from polite customer service to highly attentive reverence. The system recognized me not just as a joint holder, but as the grantor of the original accounts. Identity verified, Mrs. Miller. What do you need? There is a pending wire transfer in the amount of $900,000 to Peachtree Luxury Real Estate Escrow Services, scheduled to clear at 8 a.m. tomorrow, I said, my eyes locked on the glowing screen. I am officially reporting the supporting documentation for that transfer as fraudulent. The power of attorney on file is forged. I want that wire canceled immediately. I heard the frantic clicking of David's keyboard. Mrs. Miller, I see the pending wire. Because you are the primary grantor, I have the authority to halt this transaction. Canceling it now. A few more clicks. The wire has been successfully voided. The funds have been returned to the main portfolio. Good, I said. Now, David, I need you to initiate an immediate internal transfer. I want to open a new private revocable living trust account, strictly in my name. No joint access, no secondary users. I want every single penny from the joint accounts. All one. $84 million. Moved into that private trust. Immediately. David hesitated. Mrs. Miller, moving the entirety of the portfolio will completely drain the joint accounts. Mr. Julian Miller's connected credit cards and debit cards will be severely impacted. They will likely be declined if he attempts to use them. A small, cold smile touched my lips. David, that is entirely the point. Execute the transfer. Yes, ma'am. Processing now. I sat in the quiet of my living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. 10 seconds later, my laptop screen refreshed. The Miller Family Estate joint account balance, $0. The Scarlett Miller Private Trust balance, $1,840,000. The transfer is complete, Mrs. Miller, David confirmed. Your son's access to these funds has been legally and systemically severed. Thank you, David. Have a good night. I hung up the phone. I looked at the zeros on the screen. Tomorrow morning, Julian, Patricia, and Edith were going to walk into a real estate office expecting to be crowned the new royalty of Buckhead. I closed the laptop, walked into my bedroom, and for the first time since Marcus died, I slept like a baby. The next morning, the Georgia sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I woke up at 7 a.m., my usual time. I went through my morning routine with absolute precision. I showered, moisturized, and put on a crisp white linen blouse and my favorite tailored slacks. I brewed a pot of strong chicory coffee and sat at the kitchen island, the very place I had eaten my lonely birthday dinner the night before. I placed my cell phone in the center of the marble counter, and I waited. According to the escrow documents I had intercepted, the closing for the new house was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. At 9:45 a.m., the screen of my phone lit up. Incoming call. Julian. I picked up my coffee cup, took a slow sip, and let it ring. It rang until it went to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, then a third time, then a fourth. The phone vibrated violently against the marble, dancing like a trapped insect. I let it ring 5 times before I finally swiped the green button and brought the phone to my ear. Hello? I said, my tone as breezy as a Sunday morning. Mama, finally! Julian's voice was an octave higher than usual. He sounded breathless, panicked, and entirely out of control. I could hear the echoing acoustics of a large, polished room in the background. Undoubtedly the glass-walled conference room of Peachtree Luxury Real Estate. I could also hear the distinct, shrill whisper of Edith in the background, hissing, "What is taking so long?" "Good morning, Julian," I said smoothly. "How was your red-eye to New York? Did you get the compliance crisis sorted out?" There was a split-second pause. He had completely forgotten his own lie. "What? Oh yeah, New York. Mama, listen to me. There's a massive glitch with the bank system. I'm actually back in Atlanta. I had to step out of a meeting. My platinum card just got declined, and the escrow officer is telling me the wire transfer from an investment property didn't clear. The joint account is showing a 0 balance. I need you to call the branch with me right now and authorize a bypass." I pictured the scene. Julian, sweating through his custom suit. Patricia, sitting across from the real estate agent with a frozen, humiliated smile. Edith, clutching her designer handbag, realizing that her golden goose had just stopped laying eggs. They were sitting at the closing table, the keys to a multi-million-dollar mansion dangling just out of reach, and the check had bounced. "There is no glitch, Julian," I said, setting my coffee cup down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the marble. "What do you mean there's no glitch? The money is gone, Mama. $1.8 million just vanished." "It didn't vanish, sweetheart," I replied, leaning into the phone. "It just moved to a place where a forged power of attorney can't reach it." Silence. Absolute suffocating silence on the other end of the line. The panic in his breath stopped. "I saw the escrow documents, Julian," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I saw the fake signature. I saw the notary stamp from Edith's little spa manager. And I saw Amanda's Instagram story of your lovely dinner at the steakhouse last night. You looked very handsome. And Patricia looked beautiful wearing my dead husband's mother's pearls." "Mama," Julian choked out. His voice broke. It was the sound of a little boy who had just been caught stealing from the collection plate. "Mama, please let me explain. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, my words slicing through his excuses. "You thought I was too old to notice. You thought I was too foolish to check. You thought you could strip me of my security to buy a house for a woman who resents me and a mother-in-law who uses you." "Mama, we're at the closing table," he whispered, his voice trembling with sheer humiliation. "The sellers are here. The brokers are here. Patricia is crying. You are embarrassing me in front of everyone. Please, just authorize the wire. We will talk about this later. I'll give the pearls back. Just don't do this to me today." "I am not doing anything to you, Julian. You did this to yourself." "Mama, I have no money. You drained my linked accounts. I can't even pay for the parking validation downstairs." "Then I suggest you ask Edith to validate your parking," I said coldly. "Since she was so eager to manage my finances, let's see how well she manages yours." "You can't do this. That money is mine too. Dad left it for us." "Your father left it for me, Julian, to be passed down to you when I die. And last I checked my pulse this morning, I am very much alive." I stood up from the stool, looking out the window at the garden Marcus had planted for me. "You have 24 hours to return the pearls to my house. Do not bring your wife. Do not bring her mother. Just you and the pearls." "Mama, please. Happy birthday to me, Julian," I said, and I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun warming my face. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence was beautiful. It was the sound of a kingdom secured. But I knew Julian, and I knew the women whispering in his ear. They wouldn't let $1.8 million walk away without a fight. The war had only just begun. He didn't make it in 24 hours. He made it in 2. At 11:45 a.m., the heavy oak front door of my house shuddered under the weight of Julian's fist. He didn't ring the doorbell. He pounded on the wood like a man trying to escape a burning building. I took my time walking from the kitchen to the foyer. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Julian stood on the porch, looking entirely unrecognizable from the polished, arrogant executive I had seen in the Instagram video the night before. His custom Tom Ford suit was rumpled, the tie yanked down, the top button of his crisp shirt undone. His face was slick with sweat, and his eyes were wild, darting around the porch as if expecting the police to be hiding in the azalea bushes. He pushed past me without a word, stepping into the hallway. "Where is the respect, Julian?" I asked, closing the door calmly behind him. "You do not barge into my home like a stray dog." He spun around, his chest heaving. "Respect? You want to talk about respect, Mama? You just humiliated me in front of the most powerful real estate brokers in Atlanta. You made me look like a fraud. Patricia is at her mother's house in hysterics. My credit cards are declining at gas stations. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," I sassy said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. It was the same voice I used in the ER to tell a hysterical family member to step out of the trauma bay. "The question is, do you have any idea what you've done?" "I was buying a house," he yelled, throwing his hands in the air. "An investment. For my family. I was going to tell you—" "You were going to tell me?" I interrupted, walking past him into the living room. I picked up the manila folder I had left on the coffee table. I pulled out the printed PDF of the forged document and tossed it onto the glass surface. It landed with a soft, damning slap. "You were going to tell me after you forged my signature on a durable power of attorney? After you had Edith's lackey notarize it? Is that when you were going to tell me, Julian? When the ink was dry on the deed and the money was gone?" Julian stared at the paper. The remaining color drained from his face. The righteous anger he had marched in with instantly evaporated, replaced by the terrifying realization of his own legal peril. "Mama, it wasn't like that. The market in Buckhead is crazy right now. We had to move fast. Patricia found her dream house, and the sellers wanted an immediate cash escrow. I knew you wouldn't understand the urgency. I was going to pay the account back. I just needed the liquidity." "You are a vice president of wealth management," I said coldly. "You know exactly what the penalty is for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. If I take this piece of paper to the Fulton County District Attorney, you won't just lose your job. You will lose your license, your freedom, and your tailored suits. You will go to federal prison." He physically staggered backward, bumping into the armchair. "You wouldn't." "Don't test me, Julian. You crossed a line when you lied to my face. You burned the bridge when you tried to steal my future." I held out my hand, palm up. "The pearls." He swallowed hard. His hands were shaking as he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the velvet box. It looked smaller in his trembling hands. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it gently on the edge of the coffee table, as if it were a live grenade. "I'm sorry," he whispered, staring at the floor. "No, you're not," I replied, picking up the box and feeling the familiar weight of Marcus's legacy. "You're just sorry you got caught. Now get out of my house. And do not come back until you remember how to be the man your father raised." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a mother's grace that he had thoroughly exhausted. When he found none, he turned and walked out the door. The silence he left behind was heavy, but the pearls in my hand felt like justice. A week passed. I didn't hear a word from Julian, Patricia, or Edith. But in the modern world, silence doesn't mean a lack of information. My intelligence gathered itself in the form of my granddaughter, Amanda. She came over on a Tuesday afternoon after school, dropping her heavy backpack onto the kitchen floor with a dramatic sigh. I had baked a fresh batch of oatmeal raisin cookies, and I poured her a tall glass of milk. She sat at the island, chewing thoughtfully, her dark eyes analyzing me. "It's a war zone over there, Nana," she said finally. I paused, wiping the counter. "I don't want you in the middle of adult business, Amanda. What happens between your father and me is our burden, not yours." "I'm 17, Nana. I'm not blind," she scoffed softly. "Dad is sleeping in the guest room. Mom is crying all the time. Her credit cards got declined at Nordstrom, and she threw her phone against the wall. And Grandma Edith has been over every single day, whispering in the kitchen with Mom. Whenever Dad walks in, they stop talking and glare at him." I felt a pang of sorrow for Amanda. A child should never have to watch the adults in her life unravel. "Dad tried to sell his watch yesterday," Amanda added, her voice dropping lower. "The Rolex Mom bought him for their anniversary. He said it was temporary cash flow issues, but Mom screamed at him, saying he was embarrassing her. She said he promised her the Buckhead house, and he failed." "And how are you doing in all of this, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching out to cover her hand with mine. "I'm fine," she said, looking at the velvet box that now sat permanently on the mantelpiece in the living room. She knew about the pearls. She knew what they meant. "I think Dad is getting what he deserves, but I think Mom and Grandma Edith are planning something. I heard them talking about lawyers. Not defense lawyers, Nana. Something else." A cold prickle of intuition washed over me. When cornered, rats don't negotiate. They bite. "Don't you worry about me, Amanda," I said gently. "Your Nana has handled worse things than Edith." Before Amanda left that evening, I sat her down at the computer. I showed her a newly established educational trust fund, completely separate from the rest of my estate. It was locked, ironclad, and bulletproof. "Whatever happens in the next few weeks," I told her, looking directly into her eyes, "your college is paid for. Your future is secure. Do you understand? No one can touch this. Not your father, not your mother. It's yours." She hugged me tightly, burying her face in my shoulder. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt the sharp sting of tears behind my eyes. I was protecting the legacy. But I knew the storm was far from over. The storm arrived on Thursday morning, driving a sleek black Mercedes SUV. I was on the front porch, watering my ferns, when Edith pulled into my driveway. She stepped out, wearing a beige cashmere coat, oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses, and an expression of forced, painful diplomacy. She walked up the brick path, her heels clicking aggressively. "Scarlett," she said, removing her sunglasses. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." "I don't recall extending an invitation, Edith," I said, not putting the watering can down. "Please," she sighed, waving a manicured hand. "Let's put the hostilities aside. We are both mothers. We both want what's best for our children. Patricia is heartbroken. Julian is a wreck. I came here to see if we could find a compromise." I set the watering can down, crossed my arms, and leaned against the porch railing. "A compromise? You orchestrated the forgery of a legal document to steal $1.8 million from a widow, and you want to negotiate a compromise? You're lucky I haven't called the police." Edith bristled, her veneer cracking slightly. "Julian is a grown man. He makes his own choices. He simply wanted to provide a better life for his wife, a life matching her social standing. It's not a crime to want a proper home, Scarlett. If you weren't so stingy, so attached to hoarding Marcus's money in this old, outdated house, he wouldn't have had to resort to such extreme measures." I let out a low, dark laugh. It startled her. "You think this is about Julian providing for Patricia?" I asked, stepping closer to her. "You think I don't know what you really are, Edith?" Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You underestimate the resourcefulness of an old ER nurse," I said smoothly. "When Julian's wire transfer bounced, I didn't just sit in my rocking chair. I made some calls. I have friends whose daughters work at your medical spas, Edith. I also know how to use public county records." The color rapidly began to drain from Edith's perfectly contoured face. You're bankrupt, aren't you? I whispered, watching her eyes widen in panic. 3 of your clinic locations are 3 months behind on lease payments. You're facing 2 class action lawsuits for unlicensed practitioners administering botched Botox. Your credit lines are maxed out, and the IRS placed a tax lien on your personal home last month. That is confidential business information, she stammered, taking a step back. It's public record if you know where to look, I corrected her. You didn't want Julian to buy that Buckhead mansion so Patricia could have a nice kitchen. You needed Julian to buy it so you could move into the guest house after the bank forecloses on your property. You pushed Julian to steal my money because you needed my dead husband's savings to bail out your failed empire. Edith stood completely frozen. The arrogant, high society matriarch was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered grifter. You're a parasite, Edith, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. You attached yourself to my son's insecurities and sucked him dry. If you ever set foot on my property again, I won't just call the police about the forgery. I will send those IRS tax liens and the malpractice lawsuits to every country club gossip in Atlanta. Now get off my porch. She didn't say another word. She turned on her heel, practically fleeing down the walkway, climbed into her Mercedes, and sped away. I watched her taillights disappear down the street. I had won the battle. I had exposed her. But as the adrenaline faded, a heavy, sinking dread settled in my stomach. By stripping away Edith's last shred of dignity, I had left her with absolutely nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people in the world. The retaliation came 3 days later. It was a Monday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the prospectus for the new trust account, when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young man in a cheap windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. "Scarlett Miller?" he asked, looking at a clipboard. "Yes?" "You've been served." He shoved the envelope into my chest, turned, and jogged back to his rusted sedan. I stood in the doorway, staring at the envelope. My hands felt numb. In all my 65 years, I had never been involved in the legal system. I walked back into the living room, sat in my armchair, and carefully tore open the seal. The document was thick, filled with dense, aggressive legal typography. The header was from the Superior Court of Fulton County. Petition for appointment of conservator and guardian of an adult. Petitioner, Julian Marcus Miller. Respondent, Scarlett A. Miller. I read the words, but it took a full minute for my brain to process their meaning. Julian wasn't suing me for the money. He was suing me for my independence. I forced myself to read the petition. Page after page of fabricated horrors. The respondent, Scarlett A. Miller, has shown severe signs of cognitive decline and paranoia over the past 6 months. Exhibiting erratic financial behavior, including the sudden, unprovoked liquidation and transferring of joint family assets totaling $1.84 million. Suffering from suspected early-onset dementia, making her vulnerable to undue influence and incapable of managing her own physical and financial well-being. Petitioner requests immediate emergency conservatorship to freeze all assets and protect the respondent from her own mental deterioration. The paper slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the rug. A conservatorship. They weren't just trying to take the money back. They were trying to erase me. If a judge granted this petition, Julian would be given total legal control over my life. He would control the trust. He could sell my house. He could force me into an assisted living facility. He could sedate me. He could take my car, my phone, my freedom. Edith and Patricia had found the ultimate weapon. They couldn't outsmart me financially, so they decided to use the legal system to declare me insane. They were going to stand in front of a judge and weaponize the very real tragedy of dementia, a disease that destroys millions of families, just to get their hands on a Buckhead mansion. It was the ultimate betrayal. My own flesh and blood had signed a document declaring his mother a lunatic for a paycheck. I closed my eyes. The hurt was so deep, so profound, it felt like it might split my ribs wide open. For 10 minutes, I allowed myself to grieve. I grieved for the boy I had raised, knowing he was officially, irrevocably dead to me. Then, I opened my eyes. I picked the legal papers up off the floor. They wanted a crazy old woman? Fine, I would give them a show they would never forget. But I wouldn't fight them with emotion. I would fight them with the cold, sterile precision of a woman who had spent 35 years pulling people back from the brink of death. I walked over to the phone and dialed the number of Marcus's oldest friend, Arthur Vance, the sharpest estate litigator in the state of Georgia. The game was over. It was time for war. Arthur Vance was a man made of tweed, old bourbon, and an encyclopedic knowledge of Georgia estate law. He and Marcus had served in the Army together before Arthur went to law school. When I walked into his downtown office and dropped the conservatorship petition onto his massive mahogany desk, he didn't gasp. He read through it in absolute silence, his jaw tightening with every page. "This is a declaration of war, Scarlett," Arthur said softly, removing his reading glasses. "Conservatorship is the legal equivalent of the death penalty for your independence. They are asking the state to declare you legally incompetent. If they win, you won't even be able to buy a cup of coffee without Julian's permission." "They aren't going to win, Arthur," I said, sitting perfectly straight in the leather wingback chair. "I just need to know how we dismantle them." Arthur flipped to the back of the petition and stopped. A slow, predatory smile spread across his weathered face. It was a smile I hadn't seen since Marcus used to play poker with him on Sunday nights. "Scarlett," Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. "They hired a shark. Sterling and Croft. High-end buckhead litigators. Very expensive, very aggressive. But Julian and his mother-in-law were so arrogant, so blinded by their greed, that they made a fatal legal misstep. They handed us the murder weapon with their own fingerprints all over it." He spun the document around and pointed to the appendix. "To prove you have a history of relying on Julian for financial management, they submitted the durable power of attorney as Exhibit A to the court," Arthur explained, his eyes gleaming. "The forged document. By submitting it as evidence in a superior court petition, Julian didn't just commit private fraud. He committed perjury, subornation of perjury, and a federal offense by submitting a fraudulent document to a judge. They literally dug their own graves." A cold sense of satisfaction washed over me. "Can we use it?" "Oh, we are going to do much more than use it," Arthur said, reaching for his legal pad. "We are going to annihilate them. But I need you to do exactly as I say. We don't go to court. We demand an emergency pretrial mediation. We trap them in a room, and we lock the door." Over the next 48 hours, I moved with the precision of a surgeon. I visited my primary care physician and a board-certified neurologist. I took cognitive tests, memory evaluations, and psychiatric screenings. I printed out 5 years of financial statements, highlighting every trade, every dividend, and every percentage of growth I had personally overseen since I began secretly managing the portfolio. I was not just preparing for a legal battle. I was preparing an autopsy of my son's deceit. The mediation took place on a rainy Thursday morning in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of the Sterling and Croft building. The Atlanta skyline was obscured by gray clouds, casting a stark, shadowless light over the long mahogany table. I arrived with Arthur. I wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit, a silk blouse, and Marcus's mother's pearls resting proudly against my collarbone. I walked in not as a grieving mother, but as a queen defending her throne. Julian was already there, flanked by Patricia and Edith. Julian looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale and clammy. Patricia refused to look at me, staring intensely at her manicured nails. Edith, however, sat with her chin raised, wearing a smug, triumphant smirk. Next to them sat Mr. Sterling, a slick lawyer with an expensive haircut and a patronizing smile. "Mrs. Miller," Sterling began, steepling his fingers, "let me start by saying this is not an adversarial proceeding. Your son loves you very much. We are all here today because we recognize that the aging process can be difficult, and cognitive decline is nothing to be ashamed of. We just want to ensure you are protected from your own erratic decisions." I let him talk. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, watching the performance. "The sudden liquidation of a $1.8 million joint account," Sterling continued, "is a clear indicator of paranoia and diminished capacity. We are offering a graceful exit. Sign a voluntary conservatorship, allow Julian to manage your care and finances, and we withdraw the court petition. You avoid the public humiliation of a competency hearing." Arthur let the silence hang in the room for a long 10 seconds. Then he opened his leather briefcase. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice dripping with Southern grit, "my client is not here to negotiate a surrender. We are here to offer your client a chance to avoid federal prison." Sterling's patronizing smile faltered. Julian swallowed hard. Edith's eyes darted between us. Arthur slid a thick, blue-bound folder across the table. Inside this folder is a comprehensive psychiatric and neurological evaluation conducted 2 days ago by the chief of neurology at Emory University Hospital. Mrs. Miller scored in the 99th percentile for cognitive function, memory retention, and executive reasoning. She does not have dementia. She has a sharper mind than anyone sitting on your side of the table. Medical records can be debated, Sterling countered weakly, though he didn't reach for the folder. Perhaps, Arthur agreed. But numbers cannot. He slid a second folder across the table. These are the certified statements of the Miller family estate. For the past 5 years, Julian has believed he was managing these accounts. In reality, Mrs. Miller quietly took over the day-to-day trading. Under her sole direction, the portfolio has seen a 30% return on investment, significantly outperforming the market average. Does that look like the financial erraticism of a woman losing her mind? Julian stared at the financial statements. His jaw actually dropped. Patricia looked at him, her eyes wide with shock, realizing for the first time that her husband had been completely outplayed. But the true masterpiece of this meeting, Arthur said, leaning forward and tapping his finger on the polished wood, is Exhibit A of your own petition, the power of attorney you submitted to the court. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it carried the absolute authority of a charge nurse declaring a time of death. You forged my signature, Julian, I said. And Edith, you had your spa manager, Eleanor Vance, illegally notarize it. By submitting it to the court, you have committed a felony. Mr. Sterling, as an officer of the court, you are now in possession of a forged document. If you proceed with this petition, I will file criminal charges against Julian, Edith, and Eleanor Vance before the sun sets today. I will see my own son handcuffed, and I will watch the IRS seize whatever is left of Edith's bankrupt spas to pay the legal fines. The room went completely dead. Edith's smug smirk vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from Patricia's face. She turned to Edith, her voice shrill. Bankrupt? Mom, what is she talking about? Shut up, Patricia, Edith hissed, her composure shattering into a million pieces. Mr. Sterling looked at the forged document, then at Julian, his face turning an angry shade of purple. Mr. Miller, did you lie to me about the authenticity of this document? Julian couldn't speak. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as a pathetic sob tore from his throat. The corporate executive, the big-shot Buckhead provider, had been reduced to a weeping, broken shell of a man. She verbally agreed to it, Edith suddenly shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. Desperation made her reckless. She told Julian he could have the money. She's manipulative. She's lying. It's her word against ours. I looked at Edith, feeling nothing but profound pity for the creature she was. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out a small silver USB flash drive, and placed it next to the folders. It's funny you mention my word, Edith, I said softly, because this doesn't contain my words. It contains yours. I looked at Julian, who slowly raised his tear-stained face. You underestimated me, Julian, I said, but worse, you underestimated your own daughter. You forgot that Amanda has a moral compass, a compass she didn't inherit from you, but from her grandfather. 3 days ago, a padded envelope had arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was this flash drive and a handwritten note from Amanda. Nana, I am so sorry. I love you. Do what you have to do. I looked at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, on this drive is an audio recording. It was captured by a smart home device in the Miller household. It contains a 45-minute conversation between Julian, Patricia, and Edith. In this recording, Edith explicitly instructs Julian on how to forge my signature. Patricia suggests waiting until after my birthday dinner to file the conservatorship. And Julian, my son, agrees to it all, saying, and I quote, "We just tell the judge she's senile, we lock her up, and we take control." A collective gasp sucked all the air out of the room. Patricia covered her mouth, violently sobbing. Edith slumped back in her chair, staring blankly at the ceiling, realizing that her life as a high society matriarch was officially, permanently over. My 17-year-old granddaughter, I said, my voice thick with emotion, had the courage to protect me when my own son plotted to destroy me. She sent me the recording because she knew what you were doing was evil. I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. The pearls gleamed in the dim light of the conference room. Here are my terms, I announced to the silent, devastated room. The conservatorship petition is withdrawn immediately with prejudice. Julian, you will sign an irrevocable waiver relinquishing any and all future claims to my estate. If you refuse, I walk out of this room and hand this flash drive to the Fulton County District Attorney. I looked down at Julian. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just nodded, a microscopic, defeated movement. Mr. Sterling, Arthur said briskly, standing up and closing his briefcase. I expect the withdrawal documents filed before noon. It was a pleasure doing business with you. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer a mother's comforting hug. I turned on my heel and walked out of the glass conference room, leaving the ashes of their greed scattered across the mahogany table. 6 months later, the air in the French Riviera smelled like salt, expensive sunscreen, and absolute freedom. I stood on the teak deck of a luxury yacht chartered for a 2-week cruise along the Amalfi Coast, a chilled glass of Prosecco in my hand. A lot had changed since that rainy morning in the conference room. Julian signed the waivers. He resigned from his vice president position a week later, quietly stepping down before the rumors of his financial indiscretions could reach the firm's board of directors. Without my money to prop up their lifestyle, the Buckhead facade crumbled. Patricia filed for divorce, realizing that Julian without a trust fund was not the man she wanted to be married to. As for Edith, the IRS didn't need my help to finish her off. They seized her remaining properties a month later. The last I heard, she had moved into a small apartment in a less desirable zip code, her country club membership revoked due to unpaid dues. I kept my promise to Amanda. The educational trust was locked in tight. She visits me every Sunday she can. We drink tea, we bake, and we talk about her future. She is applying to pre-med programs, determined to become a doctor. She wears the legacy of her grandfather with pride, and when the day comes, the pearls will be hers. I sold the big empty house in Atlanta. I didn't need the ghosts, and I certainly didn't need the maintenance. I bought a beautiful modern condo overlooking Piedmont Park, and with the profits from my quiet 5-year investing streak, I decided it was time to start spending the money Marcus and I had worked so hard to save. At 65, society tells women we are supposed to fade away. We are expected to become quiet, invisible background characters in the lives of our children. We are expected to accept whatever scraps of time and respect they throw our way. But I refuse to fade. I refuse to let my age be a weapon used against me. I took a sip of the Prosecco, feeling the warm Mediterranean sun on my face. The water was a brilliant, sparkling sapphire. I closed my eyes and smiled, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. I had survived the betrayal. I had protected my legacy. I had reclaimed my voice, my power, and my dignity. I am Scarlett Miller. I am 65 years old, and my life is just beginning.